This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Joe Walsh here, governmentauction.com. It's a live auction site where you bid against other people interested in land, jewelry, coins, all kinds of collectibles, even Rolex watches. Have you ever wanted a 40-acre plot of land in Texas or Wyoming? Governmentauction.com has it. If you're the winning bidder, you don't need to go through credit checks. You just make a few down payments, keep your monthly payments going for a few years, and the land is yours. While you're making payments, you can use the land just like you would if you owned it. I know I've always wanted a big piece of land where I could go and just hang out, hunt, or hang with my dogs. And it's easy to sign up and start bidding on something that catches your eye. Go to governmentauction.com. It takes less than 5 minutes. Governmentauction.com. Hey, Joe Walsh, this is White Flag with Joe Walsh. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Doesn't cost you a damn thing. White Flag with Joe Walsh. Go to YouTube, subscribe to my channel, listen to this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all of that. Follow me on Twitter at Walsh Freedom. My guest today, and I need to tell everybody that my guest and I are speaking Wednesday morning this past week. You're probably listening to this podcast on Friday or Saturday. Charisse Dáte and I are speaking before the CNN town hall on Wednesday. I wanted to give you that context. He is the White House correspondent for the Huffington Post. He is a wonderful writer, a wonderful longtime political journalist, author of the book, The Useful Idiot: How Donald Trump Killed the Republican Party with Racism, The Rest of Us with Coronavirus, and Why We Aren't Done with Him Yet. That book, get your hands on it, is still so relevant right now today. Charisse, my friend, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Joe. Thank you for inviting me.
I wanted to speak to you. I love reading what you write, and I love the work you do. You are the consummate political journalist, but you wrote a piece that came out, I think, last weekend or early this past week for the Huffington Post called "Call It Trump's Coup Attempt Because It Damn Well Was." I've read this piece 2 or 3 times, Charisse. By the way, everybody listening, read this piece. Go to the Huffington Post and read this piece. It's so important how to cover Trump. Why'd you write it?
I thought the morning after the coup attempt, January 7th, in the morning, I thought, well, we survived. We as a country survived. And at least now we don't have to deal with Donald Trump ever again. Right? This is the bridge too far. This is it. He's done. And
wake up.
Here we are 2 years later.
Stop, Charisse.
Yeah.
I want you to explain that, because that's interesting to me, because I almost thought that on January 7th. You really thought on January 7th, like, this could finally be it?
Oh, I thought, no, not that it could. It is finally it. How, after having done this sort of thing, do you stay out of jail, first of all, right? I mean, but a political career? No, you're finished. You're finished because in America, we don't do this. In America, you lose the election, you say, we should turn out better. Congratulations. What can I do to help you lead the country? Because we're all in this together. And we knew going into that day that he wasn't going to do the grown-up stuff, and he wasn't going to go to the inauguration probably. But yeah, fine, whatever. We'll deal with that. But then what he did, he sent his mob up to the Capitol for the singular reason of stopping the certification, the transfer of power.
Yeah.
That's a coup attempt. And the only reason he didn't use the actual military was the military told him no months earlier, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we all get caught up with, there's no military involved. No, there wasn't. And there was a reason, because the United States military is professional and told him early on that no, we don't. Elections is not our thing, and we absolutely will not get involved. And in fact, if you remember, days before January 6th, there was this extraordinary open letter published in the Washington Post by the top brass of the U.S. military and past defense secretaries, saying that the military is not involved in elections, and furthermore, officers who do get involved may face problems.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what is going on?
Yeah.
Why is this necessary? Right? I mean, 232 years of elections that had never happened before.
Yeah.
And so when that ended up happening, the violence and the attempts to attack members of Congress, senators, the hunt for Vice President Pence, eventually the clearing out of the place, I thought, well, this is it. This is the moment where this is the fever breaking that allows the Republican Party to take their party back.
To be done with him, finally.
Correct. Yeah. And then you saw what happened. I mean, Mitch McConnell refused to go along with conviction of the impeachment. It might have been actually before then that Kevin McCarthy went down to Mar-a-Lago in Florida to I guess, ingratiate himself with a guy who had just done trying to end our democracy. What is the problem here, right? And so 2.5 years later, here we are. The man is running for president. He's actually now glorifying what happened on January 6th. You've seen at his rally, he actually had this ridiculous video montage honoring the January 6th domestic terrorists. So, and the party, if you look at the polling, most Republican primary voters want him to run and want him to win. I don't know what to say. I mean, I'm out of words.
So this piece you put out, call it Trump's coup attempt because it damn well was. You thought January 6th would be the end of it. With him and the Republican Party. The Republican Party would finally get off their ass and throw this guy on a deserted island somewhere and finally do the right thing. That didn't happen. And now here we are 2.5 years later. And as I read the piece, Charisse, I hear worry in your voice that the media and all of us are kind of walking down the same road with this guy again.
Well, it's a much worse road, because in 2015, this guy was an entertainer, right?
Yeah.
He was on TV. He played a billionaire. He played a smart guy, et cetera. It turned out not to be true, of course. But he hadn't done what he's done now, right? I mean, in 2015, he had not tried to end American democracy. 2015, he had not tried to seize voting machines and have DHS go down and intimidate. DHS. His chief of staff go down to Georgia to intimidate elections officials, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the path is similar, but it's much darker because now we know what he's done. And my concern as a journalist is if Americans decide, hey, you know what, democracy just isn't working for us. And we'd rather have an authoritarian like Donald Trump. In fact, we'd like that authoritarian. That is their choice. And if they want to put Donald Trump back in the White House, knowing full well that there's a decent chance he may never leave of his own volition, so be it. But they ought to know that this is what the stakes are. This isn't about marginal tax rates. This isn't about, whether same-sex marriage was okay or not okay by the Supreme Court. It's not about any of those things. It's about our democracy. And if we don't have that, we don't have 200 years of what we've been doing here. And I don't think that's sinking in. Yeah,
and I love the way you put that, Charisse. He tried to end democracy. And here we are 2.5 years later. He's the leader of the party still. He's the odds-on favorite to be the nominee. I think if he's the nominee, he has a decent chance of getting reelected.
Right.
How did we get here? I talk to Republican base voters all the time because that's the world I come from. I understand them. But Charisse, when you look at your world of the media, like this guy tried to end democracy. 2.5 years later, he hasn't skipped a beat. Like, what has the media done to make this happen? Like,
Right. Well, that's a great question, and how the news media got to where we are is a long, complicated subject, right? And how it happens that people who are 2 or 3 years out of college are covering a presidential campaign of Donald Trump is another question. How does that happen? And a lot has to do with what's happened to the news media generally, the end of classified ads.
Well,
The
because
fact we had
Sharice, as I read your piece, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep promoting it to everybody because I think it's a seminal work. I think it's one of the best things you've written. What goes through my head as I'm reading this is, how do we cover Donald Trump? We've never fucking seen anyone like this before. How do we cover him? To me, that's the question you seem to ask.
Yes, and it's like, okay, treat it honestly. If he were, let's go back to the hypothetical. If he were a serial killer, if he were a child molester running for president, would that fact make it into every story? It better, right? And I would think it would. And so why would, if that is important enough to be mentioned every time that you deal with him, why wouldn't you put what he did on January 6th? Because that is way more important. I mean, I made the hypothetical of you would never have agreed to an interview with Charles Manson on the terms that, okay, and I won't mention your murders. I won't mention what you did,
Yeah.
right? How would you possibly agree to, even tacitly, to accompany Trump on his plane, to interview Trump with the understanding that you're not going to piss him off by mentioning January 6th? You should never do that, and yet it's done every day.
So
every day.
Sharice, in practical terms, as a journalist, a political journalist on Trump's airplane, covering him during the campaign, like in practical terms, what does that mean? Every time you write about him, every time you ask him a question, that's always there. The man who led a coup. Like, how does a journalist do that?
It doesn't have to be in every question you ask him, but it sure better be in your coverage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I did, for example, was I went back and I looked at all the outlets that traveled with him on that very first trip, on his very first campaign trip to New Hampshire and South Carolina some months back. And if you look at the actual written versions of the stories, the TV versions of the stories, you'd be hard pressed to know the man had attempted a coup. You would not know that, right? Because it was not mentioned. And the reason I feel it was not mentioned was they want to travel with him again. They want access. They want Susie Wiles, the campaign manager, to return their calls. And those things don't happen if you're like me and make damn sure that every time that you mention him, people understand, oh yeah, here's what he did. And the reason it's so important, and people say, well, everyone already knows what happened. Okay, as an example, Sarah Longwell, who I'm sure you know, is a longtime Republican consultant.
Yep.
It jumped off the Trump train, never was on it, actually. Was very anti-Trump from the very beginning. And for the last several years has been doing, I think, some of the best podcast work in terms of covering Trump's voters.
Yeah.
And she has found, for example, that right after the invasion of Ukraine, even Trump voters, even hardcore Trump voters, said that Vladimir Putin is in the wrong. He's doing war crimes. He's crazy. He's a bad guy. We need to help Ukraine. And the numbers were, very stark. I mean, 80 to 20, 90 to 10, something like that. And then you had a year's worth of coverage from right-wing media saying, oh, well, Vladimir Zelensky is corrupt. The money is going to the who knows where. And you know what? What's so bad about Putin? Actually, that's Russian terror and stuff like that. And now if you look at where the polling is, I believe that if it's not a majority, it's very close to majority of Trump voters now think that we ought not send another dime to help Ukraine. So that's what media and the constant drumbeat does. It changes people's views, not necessarily that day, but over time it does. And that's why it's important to remind people every time, every day, that sure, okay, you want Donald Trump? Donald Trump is an autocrat. We know this because he tried a coup, and we know this because look at what he's saying and doing now. He's
even Sharice, and I agree with that. and you try to do that yourself, don't you? When you
Oh,
cover,
absolutely, yeah.
and you are a reporter. Do you even so-called neutral, journalists, just reporters? They need to remind people constantly what he did. Why don't they, Charisse? Like, why don't they use the word coup? Do they not believe it was a coup? Why?
Well, some of it is, and I was trying to allude to this. A lot of these people who are, I mean, I've been doing this for 35
Long
years,
time.
right? And I've been doing this at small papers in upstate New York and at the Associated Press and at NPR, Palm Beach Post, and a lot of different outlets over the years. And I've always approached this the same way. Would this story be able to make it on the front page of the Palm Beach Post tomorrow as I've written it? And if the answer is no, then I make sure that it is in tone and content, in accuracy, of course. But a lot of the folks who are covering Trump, they don't have that much experience. And if you don't know what normal is, you don't understand how abnormal what this man has done, and why that ought to be shocking, right? So every single reporter ought to be doing this. And again, go back to the example. If this were Charles Manson running for president, would the fact of what he did to Sharon Tate come up in every story? It damn well better. I mean, this is like, this is who he is. This is what makes him unique as a candidate.
Charisse, is part of the problem for the media, and I think this is part of the problem for the average voter out there, what Trump did to lead to January 6th, in my mind, is the most despicable, traitorous thing he's ever done. But Trump's done a million bad things. And so is it hard to always just focus on the man who led a coup when he's now a sexual abuser? And he will be indicted probably criminally for interfering with election results in the state of Georgia. And now he's been indicted for financial crimes. Like, is part of the problem for people in the media that there's so much to lead with on Trump before you get to the first point?
I get your point, and I agree with it. I will note, though, that both the DOJ primary investigation and the Georgia investigation are kind of about the coup attempt, right? They're about the factors that led to what we saw unfold on January 6th, the precursor steps that made that day happen. And so, and in my mind, those are the most important cases, because if you don't show that the United States of America thinks those are serious problems, you're going to encourage it to happen again.
So that's separate. That out of every horrible, corrupt, criminal, egregious thing Donald Trump has done, and I think I agree with you, what he did to try to end democracy is its own separate. Absolutely.
In fact, it is so important that in the United States Constitution, there's a prohibition against insurrectionists running for any office, right? I mean, it's not a minor thing. And so, whether that ends up being a problem for him, we'll see. I mean, there's litigation that'll be necessary.
So why doesn't your profession do this? Why doesn't your profession en masse do what you do?
And the sad answer is that Donald Trump is great television, and he's great for clicks, right? I mean, people, even if they want to hate read and hate watch, will do that more than they will watch Nikki Haley's proposal for Medicare reform, let's say, right? Or Asa Hutchinson's views on criminal justice or whatever, right? And that's a problem. And that ultimately is driven by the customer. Customer's always right, even in the news media. And if people watch Donald Trump and don't watch these others, I understand why CNN's doing this, but they have a responsibility to the facts and the truth, and that means pointing out who this man is.
So an insurrectionist is really good ratings.
Correct.
The only president in the history of this country who lost an election and refused to accept the will of the people, that's big ratings. Charisse, and again, we're having this conversation before CNN's town hall tonight. and I know you've got some issues, obviously, with CNN having a town hall, and I know you're not a TV guy, but so then play it out for me. You're Caitlin Collins, or you're moderating this thing.
Right.
And I got a lot of respect for Caitlin Collins, but I just think it's going to be really impossible. But like then working off of your theory that I agree with, how would you handle tonight's town hall?
I would make sure that all the questions that came up during the January 6th committee hearings, and all the questions that would have been asked of him had he appeared before the committee in public, or not in public, get asked at this town hall. I mean, these things are not like these organic things where people show up and just randomly ask whatever question they want. These are very tightly
pre-screened questions,
right? Yeah. So you can make sure that the questions you want, you meaning CNN. Want, get asked are the ones that actually get asked. And so, why didn't you accept the results of the election, even though you knew that you had lost? When you put out that tweet about Mike Pence didn't have the courage, did you appreciate that you were putting his life in danger, given that on TV at that moment people were streaming into the Capitol already? Why did it take you 3 hours to tell your mob to leave the Capitol? All these questions that came up that are obvious questions to him, the same questions, by the way, that I think the special counsel would ask him, if it ever came to it.
Okay, but here's the problem, Sharice. Yeah. And I agree with everything you're saying, which is why I think the world of you. But here's the problem. You're CNN, and again, we don't know what's going to happen tonight. But okay, you've got this big coup attempt 2.5 years ago. That's like in Trump world, that's an eternity ago. All of a sudden yesterday, we find out, again, he's a sexual abuser. So now you're CNN. You've got to deal with the most recent scandal or crime right in front of us. I got to believe that's going to be front of mind, the Jean Carroll case.
And I have no objections asking about that. But every voter in this country knew what he was when it came to women and how he dealt with women heading into the 2016 election, right? I mean, that Access Hollywood tape had just come out. People knew what he thought about women. There were 23 of them, I believe, who'd already come forward and said, this is how he treated me. And people voted for him. 62.5 million, whatever it was, million people voted for him anyway and made him president. So for me, it's like what happened yesterday was just the culmination of a long process of finally holding him to account for those things. But it didn't change. It didn't reveal anything new about Donald Trump. What the coup attempt did reveal about him, which we apparently have chosen to ignore, many of us, is that he doesn't believe in democracy. He would happily be a dictator tomorrow, and I can't think of a single other president in the history of this country that would have done that.
I think you and I, Sharice, are a couple of dinosaurs. My daughter is 31 years old. When she was a young girl, there was a phrase popular called, and she would say this to me all the time, "Oh, Dad, that's so yesterday. That's so yesterday." I think this is the problem with your profession with Trump is I always want that January 6th to be there always like you do. But my God, I've got to deal every week. There's a new one. And the media then deals with the new one. Right. And January 6th is so yesterday.
That is true. But again, if you have a career criminal who does lots of minor crimes, and at some point in there, murders 7 people, and then continues with the minor crimes, you stick to the 7 people being murdered, right? You don't care about the shoplifting. You don't care about the, you know what I mean? I mean, Focus here. And this is what's important to the country and democracy. Is what he did after the election and up to January 6th.
Do your colleagues, your political journalist colleagues, not do what you do, which is focus on this? And I'm glad you do, because again, ratings and or access, they're afraid of not. If you hammered this every time you covered Trump, would you not get access to him?
Oh, I can tell you, I don't have access to them.
You don't.
I mean,
It's happened to you.
the only time I get access to them is when I have a story that's so damaging to him or the campaign that they feel they have to respond. And then they put out some, ridiculous statement, don't really address the question. But, I'm not invited onto the plane. I've been at, and I ask, I ask all the time for interviews, and I have been since 2015. Let me tell you, in 2015, anybody and his brother was riding with Trump on his plane, going to various rallies and stuff. And I put my name on there, and I was supposed to be one of those doing that. I was with the National Journal at the time, right? Yeah. And I did a long story looking at Trump's actual finances and then calculating how much money he had when he took over that company, and then just inflating it by the amount that the S&P 500 went up. And I found that had he done that, had he just put the money into the stock market, just a general index fund, he could have gone finger painting for the next 30 years and been 3 times as wealthy as he was.
Well, he didn't
so
like
it's
that.
It's easy to be a billionaire if you start with $1 billion.
Yeah.
It's even easier if you start with $2 billion.
Yeah.
So, and that was the end of my traveling with Trump and getting an interview, right? So, and I didn't think anything of it at the time. I mean, he wasn't going to be the nominee. Jeb Bush was going to be the nominee. So what did it matter, et cetera? But that's how it goes. I mean, if you don't play ball with them, then you lose certain things. And I feel that the certain things you're losing are not worth it.
So they're
absolutely not worth it.
You have not played ball in the past 7 years with them, and it's impacted clearly the access you've had.
Oh, it's shut me out entirely. I mean, I don't get their little scoops about when their next rally is going to be and who's fighting with whom on the campaign and what their strategy is going to be for, dealing with DeSantis. But all of these things, in my view, are, so what? We're going to find out how he's going to deal with DeSantis. Or it's going to, they're going to do it. They're going to run an ad, whatever. Who likes and dislikes whom? That's great for gossipy stuff. I don't care. Neither does my audience, by the way. Right? Let's focus on what American voters and American generally need to know, should know, for the sake of the country and the democracy. And if you put that first, then obviously everyone will be making the same choices here. And then let's look at it practically. If everybody said, no matter what, I want to be on your plane, but I'm going to ask you about January 6th, when you have a gap. And I don't agree not to bring up these things that's going to make him mad. And everybody said that. Do we think that he's going to say, okay, no one's traveling with me? No, he's still, he needs the press more than the press needs him at this moment. And that's something that I think, that's not a moral way of looking at it, but it is a pragmatic way of looking at it. If everyone agreed that, no, we're going to put journalism and the facts first, no one would lose out. I mean, they would still pick and choose favorites, but, one criterion would no longer be, well, this person's going to be, is going to not ask me about these things that are going to make me mad.
Yeah, sure. And Sharice, don't give me names, but have you had conversations over the years with colleagues and just asked, like, come on, Steve or John or Susie, why aren't you? Like, do you feel kind of isolated? Have you had conversations with your peers on this topic?
Occasionally, sometimes, and they. You know what's funny is if you listen to other White House reporters, other people who've covered Trump over the years, and listen to them on podcasts, because in that setting, people feel more free to. Yes. They all talk like me. It's like they all agree. Yeah. The guy's unhinged. He's crazy. Yeah. There's no reason for him. There's no way he ought to be president again. We're lucky we survived the last time, et cetera. And then I go, well, then how come I don't see this in your copy? How come you can't find a way? Because you've covered the guy. You've covered him for years. You know what the truth is. Why is not the truth showing up in your actual news coverage? And why am I only hearing it when you go on Charlie Sykes' podcast, for example, or something like that? Yeah. And so, I occasionally have these conversations, but, I'm one of the most senior people at HuffPost. I can kind of do what I want. They rarely assign me stories because they know that what I'm going to write is going to, be good enough at least. and others don't have that luxury. I mean, if you're at the Washington Post and the New York Times pops a story saying that Donald Trump is about to unleash $1 million worth of ads against DeSantis about X, Y, and Z, your editor at the Washington Post can say, how come we don't have this?
Right.
And then you're on the phone with the Trump campaign. And if all you've done is ask them about January 6th, they're not going to answer your call. Now, to me, that's not a story worth getting. That really isn't, because the ads show up anyway, right? The only really important scoops are those that no one wants you to have. If you're getting something a day early, to me, that's not a scoop. That's a handout. You were chosen for a reason, and you need to figure out what that reason is. Because if it's because they like you, why do they like you? Think about that.
Sharice, how much of this is an age and experience thing? You are an old horse in your profession. These younger, and it goes to the other really prescient point you made in how we in every aspect of this man's last 7 years, we've normalized him. I think younger reporters and younger journalists, to me, seem to be more prone to just want to normalize him. Oh, they're all bad. Biden lies. Oh, da, 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 da. Come on, Sharice.
I don't know if that's the case. I think older reporters can also be that way. Let me tell you, when I was much younger, a political journalist in Florida who worked with me at the time said, one candidate will say X and the other candidate will tell you Y, and the truth is usually somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, why? The truth is where the truth is.
Yeah.
And it's your job as a reporter to figure that out and make sure that your audience knows it. Now, maybe candidate X is 100% correct. It happens. Maybe candidate Y is one. And so that's a horrible way of looking at it. But too often, I think political reporters especially, because, like I said in the piece, I mean, they're a lot like sports writers. And their entire business model is based on getting people to like them and telling them stuff. And that's not good for journalism, and that's not good for the audience.
And in fact, you bring this up, Sharice. The other whole point now is who's up, who's down, the horse race, instead of actual subject matter expertise. What did he say about the border? It just all seems to be horse race shit. Yeah,
I agree. So anyway, I've never really fit in with the political journalism crowd. I mean, that's never. But I came up in a state where you could use the public records laws in Florida to do pretty much every story you wanted, whether anybody talked to you or not. And it's very different with the FOIA federal level. It takes months to get anything, and the White House is exempt from FOIAs, and so I get the pressures of trying to get inside sources and stuff. But I get back to the only scoops worth getting are the ones that no one wants you to have. And finding stuff out because people like you and want to give you something is not a scoop. You're at that point, you're part of some sort of deal making, and you need to think about why you were chosen for that deal as opposed to somebody else. So
you're a journalist. I'm not. In my world, you and I are twins because I don't want voters. I talk to voters every day. I don't want them letting go of January 6th. To me, that's it. You strike me as taking that same position in your profession. This was unique. This is uniquely bad. We cannot forget it. In fact, we must lead with it. Sharice, you bring up in your piece, get into this for a minute. What if he had succeeded? What if January 6th had gone differently?
Yeah.
People don't think about that.
Oh, I know. No, and it's not like, given that the military was going to act in a professional, nonpartisan way. And General Milley made that very clear.
Yeah.
Mark Esper made that very clear. And even Christopher Miller, who came in afterward, the Trump appointee, made that very clear.
Yeah.
It was never going to happen that American troops were going to side with Donald Trump in this election thing. That was not going to happen. However, what could have happened was, imagine, like I said, if Mark Meadows had been vice president. And he would have said, "Oh, you're right. The president is right. These these votes that came in from Georgia and Wisconsin, they're so tainted. We have no idea who. We're just going to toss them all out. And if you do that, then Trump would have won. And that's what Trump actually wanted. That was the original plan. It wasn't to send stuff back. He wanted Pence just to declare him president. Now what? Now the House and the Senate both sue, presumably, that this is not right. The actual votes are these, and the Supreme Court takes the case, not takes the case. We don't know for sure. Let's say they do, because they see this is such an outrage and such a travesty that they got to step in.
Yeah.
They take the case. They rule in favor of Joe Biden. And on the noon on the 20th, Justice Roberts comes down, Chief Justice Roberts comes down, administers the oath, and Donald Trump refuses to leave. I mean, have we gone through the scenarios here? I mean, all of a sudden we have U.S. troops militarily shooting at Americans, like the Proud Boys and others who want to go with Donald Trump on the Civil War. I mean, this is dangerous as hell. People have, and I feel that we haven't thought through just how bad it could have been, right? Now, going forward, it could be even scarier because he's not going to make the mistake of having a General Milley or a Mark Esper. He's going to have Kash Patel. He's going to have his minions and his flunkies in charge of these very important jobs, and God knows what they'll do.
Why is it so easy to normalize Trump? People do. Why?
Because part of it is it's just so unthinkable that some of the things that you watch on TV in Myanmar, in South America, and literally there was an actual coup in Burma, right around the time of our attempted coup, right? And so we know what this looks like and how horrible it is in other places. It never happens here, and part of it is that. And I think if you go talk to, and I do, when I go on the road, I talk to people in other parts of and I say coup attempt. And what do you mean? I mean, they're not as plugged into this, right? And that's why their views are malleable. For people in Washington, D.C., who were there and who can remember the smell of the tear gas and remember the blood on the ground on the steps of the Capitol, those memories are not going to go away. But to people who only tuned in that night and said, oh, looks like there was some sort of riot at the Capitol, and that's what they knew. Looks like Trump lost control of this, and he let a bad thing happen, and that was it. And now for the next year and a half, Trump's been lying, saying that there was no violence, or if there was violence, it was Antifa, and now the violence was good because these actually were heroes. If you're getting that, and then you're not getting a correction from the media saying, "Oh no, by the way, this was an actual coup attempt," I get why they kind of shrug it off and it's not a big deal. It doesn't affect their daily lives.
Right.
I get that, So, I mean, we've been lucky to have a stable government for 200 years, with the exception, of course, for the Civil War.
Right.
And people just don't think that it could happen here. Well, guess what? It almost did. And it could happen again.
And Sharice, I've said this before, but even like I engage every day with the base, the Republican Party base. Even the week or so after January 6th, even the base was, oh my God, wow. And they were thrown on their back haunches, and some of them were afraid, and some of them were angry. And then, it was Antifa, and then it really wasn't an insurrection, and then the media is just hyping it up. Here we are 2.5 years later now, Sharice, and among the base, there's actually the view that it was a patriotic day. I mean, in 2.5 years, that's gone through that many cycles.
Right. And again, each and every one of those reflects what Trump has been saying.
Yes.
And so this is the result of Trump being able to say stuff without getting immediate pushback and explanation of what the true facts were, right? And so if you start out every story, whenever you mention Trump, use the relative clause, who attempted a coup to remain in power, that's there. And you have that reminder for people, oh yeah, he did this terrible thing to our country. And if you don't put that in there, then, I get it. People, if this is not your life, and you go to work and you come home and you try to get, dinner made and kids put to bed and everything, I get that. And so it's our responsibility, and my responsibility and my colleagues' responsibility to make sure they do understand that.
So my friend, last question. I love you like a brother, but you and I know that ain't going to happen. So, and it should. So he's having a town hall tonight. I think he's going to be the nominee, even if he's indicted 2 more times. What do we do this next year and a half? When I say the we, I mean how he's covered. What do you think will happen with the media, with how Trump's covered? What should be done?
What should be done
moving forward. Yeah,
moving forward is
you don't want him ignored. You can't have him ignored.
No. I've never been one for that.
Right.
I mean, you didn't ignore Jefferson Davis, right? After 1865. That didn't happen. He was put in prison. And so, let's pay attention to these cases in Georgia and DOJ. Those are really serious crimes. I mean, if he's charged with RICO and those and fraud, that's potentially 20 years in prison, right? And the Republican Party is going to nominate someone who's facing 20 years in prison if he's convicted on those crimes. That's insane. And that's how the questions should be framed, that here's a major party, right, founded to end slavery. Let's not forget, is now in a position of nominating a candidate who could very well be in a state penitentiary this time next year, right? And, it can't all be on the media. I mean, it's also on the other candidates.
Yeah.
And I watched the other candidates. Oh, well, Trump did really nothing wrong. And it's an outrage.
They went after the jury. In the Jean Carroll case, they attacked the jury.
Unbelievable. Right. So, the real big test is going to be what happens when he's charged with that fundamental crime against the United States of America, what he did on January 6th. Those are the most serious ones. And if the Republican Party is not able to deal with him appropriately,
what
then,
are you?
I'm pessimistic. But you know what? Interestingly, people ask me personally, well, what should be done? Everyone should register as a Republican. Take the damn party back. Oh. I mean, that's not that hard. I mean, because few people vote in the primary that if hey, no matter where I've lived, I've always registered in whatever primary I wanted to. Yeah. Because I can see who these candidates are, all of them, and I'll choose the ones that are the best in my view. Yeah. People should do that, right? Don't get angry at the party. Take it over. I mean, it can be done, and people would thank you for it, and the country would thank you for it.
He is Sharice Dáte. Follow him on Twitter @SVDATE. Please pick up his piece in the Huffington Post this past week. Call it Trump's coup attempt, because it damned well was. One more plug, my friend. Get your hands on his book, The Useful Idiot: How Donald Trump Killed the Republican Party with Racism. I love the title. The rest of us with coronavirus and why we aren't done with him yet. You're a lone voice out there in your profession, my friend. Thank you, Sharice, for what you do.
Thank you, Joe, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on.
You got it.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.